The Trinity Force build. It's actually pretty good after the buffs. Welcome everyone, I'm the Clone, and in today's video I'll be talking about how the buffs change the Trinity Force and whether or not the build as a whole works on Shaco. Spoiler alert, I had quite a lot of good games with it.
Skip it up and that up.
I will start by talking the Trinity Force itself, then explain the build as a whole, the playstyle that goes along with it, and how to destroy the enemy team with its DPS, and then I'll talk about a few more strategies that I like to use with the build. But my main goal is to answer the following question: should you play with this build? On top of it, I will also like to share with you something rather interesting, a bug, or perhaps feature. It's something that I've noticed started happening quite recently, and you could use it to your advantage. But before all of that, let's start with the build. And to be honest, it can be quite overpowered, especially when used right. Because of the insane DPS, lifesteal and sustain in general that you get, you'll be able to 1v1 almost anyone, starting from tanks to really fed AD carries. And to be honest, this is the real Bruiser build. And that's because of how tanky you can be while doing insane amounts of damage. Especially because of the sustain that you'll have, it'll be even harder for the enemy team to kill you. But most importantly, you can melt towers faster than with any other build, turning you into one of the best split pushers. But at Trinity Force, after the Season 11 changes, it became rather weak, where only certain champions could make use of its passive properly. Its passive being similar to the old Fever of Battle, where the more you attack, the more AD you get. In this case, the AD is being increased in percentages, but the thing is, instead of working on champions only, it works on towers and inhibitors as well, resulting in you being able to melt them. But the item focuses too much on attack speed, meaning that the many champions that take better advantage of AD will find the Trinity Force much harder to use. Except that's not the case anymore, and that's kind of why I'm making this video. The Trinity Force got its attack speed changed from 35% to 30% while doing the opposite to its AD, resulting in an increase from 25 to 30. Plus, its mythic passive received the same treatment, where the bonus attack speed got replaced with AD, ability haste and movement speed. And did I mention that this was also the patch where the stacking AD passive was also made to work against structures? All those changes made the Trinity Force quite a good item. In fact, it broke Yorick. He became insane at split pushing. In fact, he was so crazy that Riot Games had to nerf him multiple times. Anyways, going back to Shaco, I like the Trinity so much on him because it makes you extremely mobile and provides you with the insane DPS while keeping the burst damage that Shaco needs to one-shot carries. And that's because of the Spellblade passive, which you might say that it's also found on the Essence Reaver, except it's 100 times stronger on the Trinity Force. And that's because of instead of scaling with your bonus AD, it straight up gives you 200% base AD bonus damage. And that's just a lot more, especially in the early to mid game, where its passive turns your backstep crit into a monster. On top of that, you'll have insane movement speed because of the threefold strike, all while being insanely good at melting anything because of your DPS, and that's especially the case if you pair the Trinity with a Sanguine blade, an item that I really did not like until this build. But to be honest, after playing a lot with the build, I can confirm that the Sanguine blade works perfectly when combined with Trinity Force. The lethality makes it even better at dealing with squishies, while the Omnivamp provides with sustain, and on top of it, its passive synergizes perfectly with the Trinity's AD stacking, because the faster you attack, the faster you increase your AD. On top of that, the Spellblade passive can be reset every 2 seconds, resulting in even more damage, especially if you sacrifice your Q to try and take a tower as fast as possible. And obviously, since this strategy works against structures, it also means that it works against champions, meaning that you can be extremely versatile when compared with a build like the Kraken Slayer or even the Eclipse. With the Trinity Force Sanguine Blade combo, you can one-shot squishies, melt tankier champions, and because of the sustain that you get with later items, you can easily survive in insane teamfights. That's why I have concluded that the Trinity Force can easily be called a good mythic item on Shaco. Also, before I move on with how a completed version of the build looks like, if you guys enjoy my content and want to see more, don't forget to like this video and to subscribe if you have not done yet, so. Press I'll fucking drop you, man! Nah, I'm just kidding, guys. I couldn't do that. Or could I? Anyways, one thing that I haven't mentioned about this build is what item you want to start with. You might assume that starting with a Trinity Force is quite a good choice, and I can agree. But while playing, I've realized something, and that realization was that by starting with a Sanguine Blade, you'll have a much higher power spike. Not only because of the Dirk being an insanely good item in the early game, but because once you fully completed the Sanguine Blade, you'll have an insane clear speed, and on top of it, you'll be impossible to 1v1. And that's especially the case if you use the Hail of Blades bug, where after attacking once and activating it, you ult, and your clone will permanently have the Hail of Blades effect on itself. Also because of the attack speed and movement speed from both the Trinity Force and Sanguine Blade combined with your Ace passive, you'll not only be pretty much able to melt anyone, but you'll also be able to kite like a boss with your clone. And that's it for the first two items. You want to start with the Sanguine Blade and then go for the Trinity Force. Oh shit, my deepest apologies, but I have to interrupt this program because I have a feeling that you guys haven't gotten your dose of tips for today. And this next tip is actually quite a short one, and it's also super simple. All you have to do is, whenever an enemy is low HP, just eat them. Now, you might say, duh, but what you may not know is that you're actually guaranteed that your enemies will always flash after you E. It's guaranteed, guys, trust me. Actually, this is also a great example of how this build can melt through tanks. As I said, because of the DPS and sustain of this build, God damn it, I said that this build can also deal with tanks.
Okay. Mundo!
There we go, finally someone who has no fucking flash, man. Moving on, when it comes to a boost choice, the Berserker's Greaves are pretty much the best choice. I've talked many times in the past why that's the case, but in short, the attack speed that you get synergizes perfectly with Shaco's kit, especially with this build and runes, where having as much DPS as possible is the way to go. Now for the fourth item, you have two choices. It really depends on where you want to go with this build. I for one have tried both the more AD focused version of the build and then a tankier version of it. And I have concluded that in order for you to make use of the build's DPS, you'll also need some tankiness or at least some HP. Unless you really feel like you have to deal with tanks in the enemy team. And in that case, for the fourth item, the Blade of the Ruined King is a perfect choice. Because of its passive, you'll get even more sustain and you'll also be able to melt tanks, especially if you combine it with the Black Cleaver. The Black Cleaver is a perfect item in this build. Because of its stats, you become tankier, meaning that you won't get one-shotted, so you'll be able to do your damage. And on top of that, its passive helps you shred through armor. That's why this item synergizes so well with the Blade of the Ruined King. And remember when I said that with this build, you'll be extremely mobile? Well, the Black Cleaver's passive Rage gives you just that, even more movement speed. Every time you attack someone, you gain 5 bonus movement speed, up to 30, and it all stacks. Meaning that if you attack someone once, you already have the bonus movement speed from the Trinity. Then you attack someone twice more, and you gain the movement speed from the Bork. Then you attack a few more times, and you get to fully stack both Cleaver's passives. And since you can slow anyone you attack because of your Poison Shift's passive, you'll be insanely fast while slowing and shredding to your target's armor with each attack. This build can be insane, especially if you, for your last item, get a Titanic Hydra. The Titanic Hydra, because of the HP that you get from the Trinity and Cleaver combined, its passive will make you hit like a truck. I mean, look at how fast I can melt this inhibitor. Eventually, if you feel like you need more tankiness, you can replace the Blade of the Ruined King with a Sterax Gauge, where you get the Black Cleaver first, then Sterax into Titanic Hydra. Like this, even though you lose some of the sustain that you had from the blade, you get more HP, so you can tank better, and on top of it all, now you'll hit even harder with the Titanic Hydra. 3 other items that can also work with this build are the Adamant's Plate if you need even more movement speed and you want to split push a lot, so you can bait enemies too and waste their time, and the other two are the classic move one more choose if the enemy team is heavily focused on AP damage, and lastly the Death Dance, which is perfect when the enemy team is heavily focused towards AD damage. Now that I've talked about the build, let's go over the 2 rune pages that I found to work best and then present you with an alternative crit version of the build that I found quite fun to play with. But first, I'll share that secret tip that I was talking about. But you guys have to promise that you won't tell Rito, because if they find out, I fear that they'll remove it. I mean, of course, it's best for all bugs to be fixed and so on, but this one can actually be really useful. Anyways, to get you guys this pro tip, I had to hack into the Riot Games server's mainframe, bypass their IPv6, transfer data from Ghost servers, tab once for good fortune, cut the grass, toss the cat in the oven, but finally, after all of that, I got you guys. But before I tell you, I have to warn you again. You can use this, but do it responsibly, because it's a move so powerful, only few can wield it, without having their brains turn into spaghetti. This powerful move will deny any vision of the future and past, and that's because it involves an Oracle Lances bug, where after using the Herald, if you immediately use the Oracle Lances, something happens. The Oracle Lances reset, letting you use them twice with no cooldown. By telling you this, I gave you the power to deny and destroy enemy vision twice over, so wield it carefully, and at your own risk. Anyways, moving on with the runes. For our first rune page, I like to go for Domination with the Hail of Blades as the main keystone. No matter what, when it comes to the early game, the Hail of Blades is still top dog in terms of the best keystone for Shaco. And that's especially the case in the early game, where you want to invade at level 2 and get a neat first blood. As since you want to start with the Sanguine blade with this build, the synergy between the item and the Hail of Blades is perfect, as you'll have insane attack speed. Next you want to go for Cheap Shot, and that's because of how the playstyle of this build puts a lot of emphasis on the early game in order for it to get an advantage to scale better and faster. Therefore, Cheap Shot is really good, while Sudden Impact is a decent alternative for when focusing more on the mid game. Now you want to go for Eyeball Collection, as it's the rune that you can stack fastest. And lastly, you want to go for Relentless Hunter, as it works perfectly with Shaco's snowballing playstyle, and because you want to get where you need to go as fast as possible. Now for my secondary 3, I always like to go for Precision, as Legends of Legacy works wonders with this build, especially since it's so easy to stack. I've also played with Legend Bloodline, and I actually feel like it's a much quicker option, as it feels harder to stack, and in the early to mid game the attack speed is much better. Therefore, by the time the Legend Bloodline becomes good in the later parts of the game, the match is probably already decided. For our last choice, I prefer Coup de Grace, as it can be useful in all stages of the game. Perhaps you could also make Last Stand work quite well in some situations, as you'll find yourself fighting with quite low HP at times, but I usually prefer to engage when I have the HP and I'm sure that I can win the fight. Now that I've talked about the main build and main runes, I present to you the ultimate split pusher. Now, I did say that I will also present you with a crit version of the build, so here it is, the Cheesy Critter. And I know that the crit build looks rather funny, but in short, here's the thing. Since both Trinity Force and Phantom Dancer need a few attacks in order to have their passive stacked, I thought to myself that it can work quite well. The rest of the items in this build are classics, like the Navori Quick Blades that work even better with this build, as they'll have much more attack speed in order to make use of their passive. The Infinity Aegis for insane burst damage, and the Mortal Reminder is when you need to reduce the enemy's healing, or the Lord Dominix for when having to shred to someone's armor. Now, I've played quite a few games with a crit build, and personally, my experience was quite good, but if you want to go ahead and play with this build, I have to warn you that you're doing it at your own risk. Again, here are the two builds, go ahead and play with both, and do let me know what you think of them. In terms of runes, I also said that I will present you with a second rune tree that might work quite well, and here it is. Now, I've played in the past with the Conqueror on Shaco, and I have concluded that it takes too long to fully stack it in order to make use of its full potential. But with this build you'll have a much greater opportunity to do so, especially when playing against an enemy team comp that lacks burst damage and champions that can melt you like Malzahar or Cassiopeia. Again, just like with the crit version of the build, with this alternative rune page you're quite on your own. Oh, and by the way, obviously the Conqueror page works best with a non-crit version of the build. And now that I've talked about the best build and runes that go along with it, I want to show you a few more really cool things that you can do in order to carry and win your games. All the following examples will be featuring the Trinity Force build, aka the split pushing god. To begin, I do a classic invade, where after taking my buff, I go for the enemy buff and get first blood and so on and so forth. Or am I? Actually, I want to show you something even more interesting regarding the invade start that I always like to do. It's something that I haven't actually talked about last time. What happens if the enemy jungler also starts on the top side, aka the same side that you start on? You can't invade anymore now, can you? Well, what I'm about to show you is quite insane, so buckle up, because after I take my first buff, I straight up rush to the other. Then I invade without giving a damn. And because you're playing Shaco, you can easily do this and get to the enemy buff before them. But not only, after taking the enemy's buff, you'll also be level 3, meaning that you can wait for them in a bash and surprise them. Also, you can do the same if you get a leash from your bot lane. Moving on for my next tip, I probably already mentioned this in the past, but with Shaco you can actually solve the dragon level 4 with ease, and with basically no items. All you need is the jungle item and the refiable potion. Also, if you're level 6, you don't actually have to use a rule to take the dragon, unless you want to take it as fast as possible. And if you're not even level 6 and want to take the Drake, all you have to do is dodge the dragon's knockback with your Q. And once you get the hang of it, it's actually quite easy to do. All you have to watch out for is to time your Q right as the dragon is about to knock you back. For my next tip, I want to talk about what to do when caught alone in the enemy jungle by multiple champions. Always try to have weird, unpredictable movements. If you do this, it's going to be a lot harder for the enemies to predict what you're going to do. Anyways, that's how I got away there. Plus, the Z having some brain lag. Now at the end, I shift through space and time like always and get away. Point is, always play as aggressive as you can and always invade the enemy jungle as often as you can. Especially in moments like this, if you manage to kill the enemy jungler, waste 2 laners times and then get away with it, you'll tilt the enemy team beyond oblivion. Also, here you can use a really neat Q trick, where when you approach a wall, move for a split second in the opposite direction to make enemies think that you're about to trick them, when in reality you just Q over the wall. The reason why this works is because the enemies expect you to face towards the direction in which you're about to move, but with Shaco that's not the case. You can Q anywhere without changing the direction in which your champion is facing. And this especially works best when combined with jerky movements. Moving on, something that you should always do with Shaco is to fight over the skull crabs, especially if you're in a favorable matchup or if you're just having night up. Fights like this can especially benefit you, as once you mastered how to play the early game, you'll be able to turn fights like this around. And if one or more of your teammates join in, you can easily win with a nice placed box. In this instance, you can even see me going after the Tristana, even though it might not be the safest move. And that's because I like playing as aggressive as I can, and it pretty much always pays off. So pro tip with Shaco, always play as aggressive as you can in the early game, especially if you have the Dirk, as it gives you a super nice power spike. And here are just a few more examples where I pressure the bot lane even harder. Pressure the bot lane until they go AFK, and with Shaco if need be you can just dive the bot lane. And you should always be confident when diving someone with Shaco. Just walk up to them and attack them with a hail of blades, eat them and then just ult. The tower will reset its aggro and you'll barely lose any HP. The game is especially over when you find yourself at a point where you don't even let their bot lane come to lane anymore. You just kill them before they even get under tower. And this is just a really cool thing that you can do with Shaco. Just give no fucks. Lastly, when it comes to the late game with this build, just pressure lanes with your insane split pushing capabilities. Catch enemies whenever you get a chance and you should be good. My last pro tip before I let you go, try to always stay out of vision and flank. As the enemies will be focusing on a team fight, you can easily catch their backs and clap them. And also, try to time your attacks with their flash. Once you do it once, you'll be able to do it every time. If you want to see more videos, don't forget to drop a like and to subscribe. This time is not actually a threat. When it comes to the AP guide, I'm still working on it because I decided that I want to make it longer and just include a lot more in it. Actually, I'm just lazy and I didn't really feel like playing with the AP Shaco. I'm just kidding. I thought that Trinity Force really deserved its video, especially after it got buffed. So here it is. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Thanks a lot for watching, and as always, until next time, don't trip and break your necks, cause you'll fucking die. Stay safe out there.
Lady Sansa, forgive me. I'm a bit confused.